You talk about being multi-passionate, and I first want to get a definition on what that even is.
Yeah. So I feel like that's one of those, if you know, you know, if you are, you struggle with focus, with knowing what to do next and how to move the needle forward, because you have so many projects that you want to be working on concurrently. So if you've changed jobs a lot of times throughout your life, and I constantly say, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And that's not really true. I really have zeroed in on what is my lifeblood passion at this point. But if you say those words, then you are multi-passionate. Okay. I describe it as squirrel brained. I describe it as, shiny object syndrome, but it all means the same thing.
How does somebody hone in on what it is that is their superpower when everything seems so great?
Yeah. It's a process that I walk people through, and it starts with a brain dump. I think we feel overwhelmed because ideas come in and we're like, ooh, that sounds good. And it's very distracting. So if you're involved in an activity when that happens, you're sort of like unsure of where to go next. The brain dump is kind of the solution to overwhelm. Write down everything that has ever been interesting to you, anything that might be interesting, something you want to do once, and then just check the box and say you did it. Make the list exhaustive. And that act in and of itself is just this like sigh of relief. Everything's been captured on paper. You've gotten it out of your brain. And now there's a little bit of like empty space to breathe again. And then it's a combination from there of determining what your real superpowers are. Like, what are the things people ask you for help with? When do you feel most beautiful and most confident? What are the activities you're engaged in at that moment? You make a list of those, and then you compare it to what the needs of the market are. One of the modules in my course is all about market research. So just asking what people need or paying attention to what people come to you and ask you for help with. And putting all of that together is sort of like pouring all of your ideas into a sieve and slowly narrowing it down until you end up with, ideally, about 3 to 5 that make the most sense to pursue right now. It does not mean you have to leave everything else on that brain dump behind, but you can't do it all at once. That's just obvious. Yeah. So you start with, your money maker, and then you have maybe 2 other side projects that you do on the side. And I teach how to manage all of that, how to create sacred time in your calendar, even if you work a full-time job, even if you are a parent managing a household, so that you can fit those passions in and actually make progress on them. Because that's the big problem, right? Is you do so many things that you don't feel like you're seeing any real progress on any of them.
So how did you get to this place in your life where you have clarity or focus, or you can coach others to find out their own superpower?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like a lot of multi-passionates have this same sort of growing up story where you just felt like you were doing life wrong. Basically, from the moment we were chose to choose a major in college. At 17, the prefrontal cortex of our brain isn't fully developed yet, and that's our decision-making faculties right there. So you're supposed to pick what you're going to do for the rest of your life before that part of your brain even really knows how to do that. And I went in as an environmental chemistry major and started flunking out of school. So I switched to theater and graduated with a theatrical costume design degree.
From chemistry to theater. Oh yeah.
That's
a 180.
I had to change my major even because I had to have a non-congruent major. So I changed from Spanish to anthropology. It was my whole life looked like that. And then I moved to New York and because I wanted to do costume and started working for a woman who was a couture designer on the Upper East Side. And it was the most thankless, grotesque job. When The Devil Wears Prada came out, my mom sent me the book and said, "This is your life." And I was like, oh, what am I doing? And then I got engaged and then decided I wanted to be a wedding planner and got certified. And we moved to
There's
to
a
LA.
Certification for wedding planning?
There's a wedding planner certification from the Wedding Planners Association of America.
Okay.
Yeah. And the bottom line is I kept changing. I would do something for 2 years. I would even open a business in many cases. And we'll get to why this happened. Like, then I would close it. So I have all of these like failed businesses in my past, and I felt like a flake. I felt like I was doing my life wrong. And I just hear the same story from so many people. If you stuck to one thing, you'd be so successful. The implication being I wasn't successful. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't just stick with one thing. And then I came across the book Refuse to Choose by Barbara Sher. And she wrote it in like the late 70s. So it's not new. And Barbara actually has recently passed away. But the work that she did while she was here to help people like me understand that they are not broken, that we just have brains that work differently from other people's brains. The real key is to figure out what's going to make us feel like we're thriving, because the fact of the matter is one job for the rest of our lives is not, we're going to feel like we are dying on the vine. So our lives are going to look differently, and that's completely okay. And when I started finding people to interview on the podcast who were like success stories in and of themselves, by their own right, and I just knew that it was my job to bring that to the rest of the world so that other people could hear that it is possible to do. It's just a matter of getting clear. Everyone says that the problem is focus. I can't focus. I'm easily distracted. I don't know what to do next. You've got to get clear before you can ever hope to have focus. So I just went through like journaling and hiring coaches and therapy and shadow work, and just it runs the gamut, the work that I did, and ultimately was able to come up with a system that in turn helps other people figure this out for themselves.
You've interviewed some incredible people. Are there tips that you just start incorporating for yourself? Because I know I definitely do that with people I interview.
Yeah, it's mostly for me. I've always been on a mission to find the time management system that is going to work best for me. And that is a work in progress. It's constantly evolving. And so that's sort of my favorite thing to ask people about. Like, you've written 8 books. How do you manage your time? And then I usually implement their system for a while. What I have found that works best for me, and I agree that the reason I've had to try out all these other systems to see if they worked is because everyone sort of needs their own unique system. And I do work with people to help them create the one that works for them. But I have what I call my 5 priorities system that is sort of an amalgamation of the best tips I've heard from my podcast guests. And essentially it's those things I mentioned at the beginning that are my ultimate passions: having my work week scheduled out and then committing a percentage. Like, think of a pie chart.
Mm-hmm.
My 5 priorities are on that pie chart, and they each have a slightly different percentage of that 40-hour work week that I want to commit to them. But within that structure, I'm going to spend 10 hours working on my novel. I'm going to spend 15 hours working on my podcast. Within that structure, I can do whatever I want. So as long as I'm spending 15 hours, it can look however it needs to look. And I believe that creative people go into a creative field because they're like, it's going to be free. I'm a freewheeling creative. I can do whatever I want. That is not the way to thrive as a creative. And if you read about, famous artists, all of them had a system. And I just believe that the system is flexible structure. So within that 5 priorities methodology, I get to be loose, and that really satisfies my creative needs while getting stuff done.